For some unknown reason, our trip took a lot longer. Time was passing on and we were nearly passing out, but we eventually got back to the Manhattan dock and had no alternative but to get a taxi to the airport. We arrived just in time, boarded the Laker Airways plane, bound for London. At least we thought so. Just kidding. It was the right one, and we had a safe and enjoyable flight to England. I hope you got a kick out of the rather lengthy travel saga. We certainly did. Take a rest and have a brew before reading about the many changes we found back in England. Back to England, 1979 to 1986. Mom and Dad dashed out to greet us when the taxi dropped us off at their house in Bolton on 17th September 1979, where we had arranged to stay for a while. The reunion was terrific, with lots of stories to tell and the handing out of presents. Absences make the heart grow fonder, but presents bring better results. My folks were both in good health and still very content in their little bungalow. We had lots to talk about. The good news is that they had both retired. The bad news is why Dad was forced to retire. Rapid advancement of technology in the automobile trade and, quite frankly, the slow but certain extinction of the demand for craftsmanship in most areas forced him to switch from spraying luxury cars to painting heavy trucks. After a couple of years doing just that, a box off one of the trucks being painted fell from an overhead crane and pinned him to the floor. He survived, of course, but was hospitalized for a few weeks and spent the next few months convalescing. The negligent company and the extremely incompetent solicitor involved did not do him justice, so he reluctantly took early retirement. Ironically, this was a blessing in disguise as he spent many more happy years gardening, which surprisingly had become a passion. Rita and I spent a wonderful few weeks there. It was so great to relax with family after the quite hectic lifestyle we had led for the past 9 years. Alas, all good things come to an end, and we had to seek employment. I was lucky in that I soon secured a job in Blackburn with a very specialized financial services company. This story will come later. Rita, however, met a couple of obstacles in her endeavors to secure a position in personnel management. First problem was the fact that this appeared to be a field dominated by males. Thank goodness this kind of discriminatory employment practice is now history, almost. Also, it was inferred that she was over the hill and unemployable at age 45. This came as a complete shock to us, as in Canada this kind of nonsense had been banned for years. Sadly, you still see job advertisements in the UK stipulating age limits and gender for job applicants. Progress has been made, but not enough, and it's taking too long. If any influential person, male or female, young or old, is reading this, please pull your finger out and stop this blatant abuse of a person's God-given right to earn a living. I appreciate that we have come a long way in eliminating certain types of discrimination, but we are negligent in enacting legislation, which ensures that all persons have a chance to put their knowledge and experience to productive use at any age and irrespective of their gender. There, that's that off my chest. You deserve some good news now after patiently reading the previous diatribe. We had kept in touch with friends back in Canada, and several of these had mentioned that they had seen Rita's television commercial. The letters came from across Canada and even California. They all remarked that Rita looked tanned, bubbly, and came across real well. We wondered why she had never received the money that was promised if the advertisement was used. So I wrote an inquiring letter to the company in Chicago. A short while later, Rita rang me at the office. She was so excited and told me that a check had arrived at home for $1,600. She went on to say that this was more than she expected, and what should she do? The innocence and honesty of my girl has to be seen to be believed. I replied without hesitation, "Put it in the bank and we'll sort out the technicalities later." The next day, a courier delivered a letter from the advertising company, which apologized for the delay and stated that future checks would be sent to this address. Future checks? Sure enough, we got a check for $180 every 2 weeks for the next 6 months. What a godsend that was. It really helped bridge the gap until Rita could manage to persuade some employer that despite her age, she still had all her faculties. The civil service believed her and hired her to work in the benefits section. The money was not as good as her previous job, as the TV commercial worked out to be $126,000 an hour. She only worked 2 minutes, though. Before we had left Canada, we had the good fortune to be given an opportunity to buy a detached bungalow in Bolton, sight unseen. It belonged to a good friend of my brother who was going to live with his relations down south. He did right by us and let us have it at a very reasonable price. So in we moved, and started renovating pretty boring stuff. My job, on the other hand, was extremely interesting but demanding. Very long hours and stressful. The overall situation was not helped by the ongoing differences of opinions between the two directors of the company. They went their separate ways about 3 years after I started. A new era began. I was asked by one of them, the company actuary, Douglas T., to join him in his new enterprise in Horrick. We went through the fun and expensive business of leasing and furnishing office premises and all that comes with setting up an efficient company. Douglas was a genius in his field, fun to work with, and really ahead of his time, and I was good in my field. Between us, we created a well-respected and profitable group of financial companies. 3 more partners and contented employees running around all over the place. During this exciting but exhausting time, there were many significant events, but my emotional makeup will not allow me to elaborate on these. Rita had retired early, and we had moved to a bigger house on the scenic route to Blackpool. We now had everything we ever dreamed of, but I was not happy to say the least. I was by now mentally and physically exhausted. I asked myself the question, if I am working 7 days a week, when would we be able to enjoy the fruits of my labor? No weekends and 1-week vacation each year, which does absolutely nothing to relieve stress, meant that retirement was the next foreseeable period of significant enjoyment. I should be so lucky to reach age 65, was my thinking. One day, between Christmas and New Year, I had a terrible pain in my chest and left arm. I must admit, I was very worried. I went home early from the office. I lied to Rita and told her that it was the holiday season, so we had decided to have an early day. I discreetly sorted out all my many insurance policies and other papers, left notes for Rita, and settled down to watch TV and waited to die. I know that sounds dramatic, but maybe you have had the same feeling at some bad point in your life, so hopefully you'll understand. Apart from the pressures at work, I was overweight and smoked too many cigars. I was a heart attack waiting to happen, and I firmly believed that my time had come. 25 minutes. Whilst I was trying to hide my sadness and discomfort from Rita, the telephone rang. It was Douglas asking what the doctor had said. The shit hit the fan. I still wouldn't go to the hospital, even after Rita's pleading, so she called my brother. Between them, they talked me into going to the emergency ward. I was wired up, prodded, and poked and checked out okay. They thought my heart was fine, but I'd had a warning. The news was good, but thinking my heart was fine was not good enough, so I went to see a specialist. More wires and prods followed, and he confirmed that my heart was indeed okay, but I should heed the warning and slow down. When I started to get dressed, I took out a shoehorn to ease on my shoes. The doctor jumped up and literally screamed, "That's why you're here. You try to think of everything." He went on to say, "I've been in practice for 30 years and never known anybody to bring a shoehorn into my office. Let things happen, and if mistakes are made or things aren't perfect, so be it." I have tried to heed this good advice ever since. I was also battling my emotions over the sudden death of my ma'am at the early age of 68. She took sick and went to the C1 of the family doctors. A cavalier, incorrect diagnosis was done, and as a result, the wrong treatment was prescribed. You can imagine how I felt. I won't mention the GP's name, but I bitterly hope that his incompetent actions will haunt him for the rest of his life. The best I could do to vent my feelings was to see his partner in the practice. I told him not to comment, just sit and listen. I suggested that he throw the incompetent prick, posing as a doctor, on the streets, and when the time was right, I would start legal proceedings. I hope they both lived with this threat for a long time. There were 2 reasons for my somewhat limited action. Firstly, doctors stick together like shit to a blanket in cases like this, and the second and most important, my dad was still alive and I didn't want to add to his grief. My dad died suddenly 6 months later at the young age of 70. The time was right to attack the doctor, but I did not have sufficient cash to follow through on my threat. My anger has now subsided somewhat, but I still remember vividly, and maybe someday, I really can't find the right words to record an appropriate epitaph for these wonderful parents that did everything right in this world, and pray that they will get the rewards they deserve in their next life. One blessing is that they lived long enough to see both of their sons, with the help of their upbringing, achieve quite high levels of success. Making your parents proud of you is a very rewarding achievement in itself. Those of you that are still young enough to do that, please take note of my worthwhile conclusion. All the events, both emotional and physical, over the past 6 years took its toll on me, didn't do Douglas much good either. And I had started to reassess what was really important. I gave myself what I like to call a mental bath and zeroed in on what I wanted out of life. Very simply, good health with enough money to enjoy a less complicated life, with friends instead of just business acquaintances. Most of us generally do things and acquire possessions to convince ourselves and others that we are successful. I now believe that this was not sensible thinking, and radical changes had to be made. It was now time to start thinking about Rita and myself. My involvement with the company was by now very complex. The only way out was to make an immediate clean break and have a fresh start without worrying about the consequences. At 9:50 a.m. on August 17, 1985, I advised everybody concerned that Rita and I were returning to Canada. You may consider this to be a stupid decision, but I left the business and voluntarily took neither shares nor cash. I was determined to start again, with only the house proceeds and personal possessions. My leaving this way had a six-figure price tag, so I would have a constant reminder of the life-changing decision I had made if I was ever tempted in the future. I would still dabble and work hard, but not to the extent I had over the past 6 years. We sold everything and headed back to Canada. Back to Canada, 1986 to 1988. It was a bittersweet flight back to Canada, as we left on my late mother's birthday, 13th of February, 1986, and arrived on our wedding anniversary the next day. There were no soldiers to greet us this time. It was a wee bit embarrassing as well. We took our Cocker Spaniel, and when we were at the checkout, the airline officials brought the traveling cage containing Pepper patiently waiting to get out. Ignoring the warnings from the airport official, we opened the cage door and the relieved pet shot out and shit on the beautiful marble floor. If you've never seen 400 disgusted people run away from a smell, you've never lived. It was hilarious. The pissed-off official grunted and said, "That's why we say not to let the animals out until you leave the airport." He waved us through the customs without delay, after Rita had cleaned up the mess. Thanks, Pep. The trip to Ottawa was all planned. We were to take the train from Toronto to the capital, and Joe would pick us up at around 10:3 that night, and as it was only about 10 a.m., we had plenty of time. Sounds so easy. We couldn't even get from the airport to Toronto without a bloody hassle. The bus company wouldn't take Pepper unless we put her in the baggage compartment under the floor. No way. After 10 hours in a cage, taxi drivers wouldn't take her because of the chance of a reoccurrence of the marble floor incident. We finally found one money-hungry taxi driver who really didn't give a toss, and we got to the train station. Can you imagine us? Stood in the snow. Remember, this is February, with loads of baggage and Pepper's traveling cage. What a sorry sight. I couldn't put my cap down lest people throw money in it. It got worse. The ticket office wouldn't book our pet on the scheduled train. She would have to travel on the cargo train at midnight. This was another no-no decision. We went to the bus station and pleaded, partial success. She could be carried on board, provided she was muzzled. Off we went to buy a muzzle. No luck. This was getting ridiculous, so we had a brainwave to hire a car. We explained our predicament to the young lad in the rental office. He was very obliging until he asked for a credit card, which we didn't have as we'd just arrived in the country. Stupid. Another refusal. You will gather by now that I'm going up the wall and must surely understand my almost grabbing him by the throat and, in no uncertain terms, insisting on seeing the manager. "He's at home today," was the stuttered reply of the shit-scared lad. I demanded his boss's telephone number. Luckily, he was in, and we reached an agreement to pay a $700 deposit, and the car was ours. The relieved wimp made all the arrangements, and the only car available was brought round to the office. I don't know if you are familiar with North American cars, but it was a Camaro. This is a fast sports car and not very big. However, fully loaded and with Rita sitting at 45 degrees, we set off to Ottawa. It was now about 5:30 p.m., and we all know what this means anywhere in world. Rush hour. To add to this, Toronto was snow-covered, and I was driving a sports car on the wrong side of the road for the first time in 6 years. I took a deep breath, prayed, and put my foot down. At least we could slide and skid the 300 miles to our destination at a fair pace. In the meantime, we had telephoned Joe to explain the delay and arranged to meet him on a mall car park later than previously planned. We pulled into the agreed meeting place, but no Joe. After a while, I walked to a telephone booth on a shopping mall across the street, spotted a worried couple of people anxiously peering into the darkness. Only idiots sit in their cars on deserted car parks in this weather, unless they have a damned good reason, so this must be Joe. It was, and he explained that I had pulled into the wrong shopping center. No harm done, and I followed him home. Joe and family had moved since we had left, and his new 3-bedroom house in a kind of mews was real nice. We were once again made very welcome and stayed a couple of weeks before thinking we should move on to sorting out our affairs. By way of an example, when the door was open, a computerized message blurted, "Your door is ajar." And when we closed it, it said, "Thank you." All the warning lights had been replaced with this helpful little chip who was constantly there to tell us if anything was wrong. He proved to be quite talkative. We said our goodbyes, yet again, and headed south to the sunny fruit belt where we had lived previously. Surprise visits are not always welcome, but I like to think this one was. Our good friends Don and Jane in Burlington, who we had kept in contact with but had not told about our return to Canada, were speechless when we arrived at their door. They jumped for joy, at least I think that was the reason. We reminisced forever, and when we got around to our non-existent plans, they offered us accommodation until we made up our minds what we were going to do. I bet they wish they never had. It took several weeks. Don was still working at DeFasco, the steel mill where I used to work. With a noticeable sad expression on his face, he explained that the place had changed dramatically and was not the same as it used to be. The economic climate had necessitated huge cuts in the workforce, and the paternal attitude had more or less gone by the board. Efficiency was now the key word. Many of my previous associates had taken early retirement, which, I assumed, reflected their reaction to the changes. Our generous and understanding hosts must nevertheless have been relieved when, after a relaxing read in the toilet, I announced my intention. While in a sitting position in the little boy's room, I read an advertisement about a lakeside marina that was for sale about 150 miles north of Toronto. It sounded affordable and was located in a popular tourist area. Don and Jane very kindly, and without hesitation, drove us up in their car to see the place. It was convenient, as they had rented a summer cottage in the same area for the season, so they took the opportunity for a short break. The real estate ladies showed us around the place. We took the plunge and went through the formalities to buy it. In Canada, once all the papers have been signed with no conditions, you own the property. It would take about 3 weeks to complete the transaction. We spent a pleasant evening at the cottage playing cards, till the telephone rang. It was our friend's son informing us that Rita's brother Joe had suffered a heart attack and was in the intensive care unit in Ottawa General. Rita obviously broke down and wanted to leave immediately. We all discussed the situation and decided to leave the following morning. It was a sad night and we left about 5 a.m. the next morning. Back in Burlington, we transferred to our little talking car and arrived at the hospital about noon. The timing was perfect, as we met Joe's daughter Therese at the door, so we lost no time in finding the ward. We managed to see Joe for a short time before he had to be prepped for a triple bypass operation. The next few weeks, until Joe was well underway to recovery, saw us driving between Ottawa, Burlington, and the marina. I seem to remember that we traveled about 8,000 kilometers during this time. It was during this time that Pepper became ill. The vet diagnosed that she had suffered a nervous breakdown with all the traveling. Time resolved this problem. Joe was eventually discharged and returned to work for a few years. He and May then bought a house in Ireland and settled in for retirement. Unbeknown to anyone at that time, a major problem resulting from the heart procedure was shortly to become evident. Assuming that all was now well, everyone returned to their normal lives and Rita and I concentrated on our new home and place of business. The marina was situated in Dunchurch, a small village on Whitestone Lake, about 25 kilometers northeast of Parry Sound. There were about 250 permanent residents during the winter. This increased to around 3,500 inches the summer months, with the influx of relatively wealthy people coming to relax in their summer cottages. By the way, a cottage in this sense is a wooden one-floor house, usually on the side of a lake and used for recreational purposes. There were roughly 500 of these around our lake, and each one had at least one boat. Surely this would provide enough work to keep me busy. Our new place consisted of a repair shop and store on the ground floor and spacious living accommodation above. The panoramic vista from our elevated home across the snow-covered lake was magnificent. The view of pine trees and a multitude of nature's other creations were something that most people would envy. The docks, with an old but functional petrol pump, were clearly visible on the edge of our 700 feet waterfront paradise. There was a spray booth and boat storage building, as well as a concrete boat ramp. Nighttime was unreal. The silence was broken only by animal sounds and the rustling of trees. In this part of the country, free from the pollution of industry, the sky is so clear and permits a breathtaking view of the stars which we had never realized were so bright. We felt comfortable that we had made the right decision and settled in to sort out the business aspect. The previous owner spent a week with me going over the routine of running this new venture, and then we were thrown in at the deep end. I went over the books once again and came to the same conclusion as I had reached before we bought it. The owner was on the verge of bankruptcy. That, and because we only required a very small mortgage, was why we got it for a good price. We had retained a fair sum to trade our talkative car for a necessary new Dodge pickup and make necessary modifications to the establishment. I compiled and studied various models and decided that, if we were to succeed, all prices would have to be increased by about 50%. I took the bull by the horns and spoke with every customer over the telephone. I introduced myself as the new owner and, as best I could, outlined my thoughts about the future of their marina, including the necessary price increases. I must have got it right, as every one of them had expressed concern about the previous owner, whilst taking advantage of his low prices, and didn't hesitate to accept my rather large price hikes. This was a fantastic start, and a big boost to our enthusiasm. Having admired our property, like two proud peacocks, and established a provisional business plan, we wandered into the village. It was idyllic, and the people were so friendly. But as in most villages, they were obviously very wary of newcomers. This was a challenge we had to accept and conquer. We were lucky. We soon got an opportunity to prove we were nice people. There was an upcoming dance in the village community hall that presented an opportunity to meet most of the local inhabitants and have a good laugh. One of the locals had too much to drink. He collapsed on the floor. The sight of this country lad lying there in his wellies remains with us to this day. Rita's beauty, personality, and dancing prowess, coupled with my jokes, for better or for worse, proved to be a successful combination, and we seemed to have made a good impression on most of the villagers. The day after the hop, we must have had a visit from 20 of our new friends to warn us about the bad guy that owned the only other marina on the lake. He was a real terror and had set his own rules in this unincorporated community. In case you don't know, that's a town that has not been adopted by the authorities and therefore has none of the usual annoying regulations. For example, I later bought some land adjacent to the marina and submitted my proposed plans on the back of a cigarette packet. They were approved. Believing that the best line of defense is attack, I went to see this pariah. I introduced myself and we chatted a while. He was eventually honest enough to say that I'd probably heard a lot of talk about him in the village. I jokingly advised him that I didn't pay any attention to gossip, and then told him confidently that my thinking was, if anybody needed $1, I would gladly lend or give them one. But if any such person tried to steal it from me, I'd rip their hand off at the shoulder. I guess I'll never know whether my timing was just right or whether I came across as a person to fear, but he actually sold his marina and moved to somewhere in Georgia. Fortunately, the guy that bought it proved to be a nicer guy and not nearly as much competition. I was lucky enough to hire a marine mechanic that was moving from the far north to our area. Jeff was a very competent tradesman, and his experience helped us tremendously. We were on our way. Jeff would service the engines, and I would use my past experience and work on the boats and try and generate sales. Rita would look after the shop, and between us, we would attend to the petrol pump. Easy when you are determined, isn't it? A chap told his pal that, during a night out courting, his girlfriend told him she could get more in the mood if the top was removed to expose the stars. He complained that it took 5 minutes to oblige her. His friend replied that he had a convertible, and the roof is down in about 5 seconds. The troubled lad said, "My car is not a convertible." That's another example of determination. The extremely cold climate in the near north of Ontario is a headache. The lake starts to freeze in early November, and the ice usually gets to about 2 feet thick. This means that all the boats have to be removed from the water and measures taken to protect them from the elements. Basically, the motors have to be drained, the oil changed, and the boat itself covered in some way. We had the storage shed, botel, which held in the region of 36 boats depending upon size. The previous owner filled this, and that was enough for him. I bought a system for shrink-wrapping boats, like new boats are covered with when delivered. This was labor-intensive, but it didn't entail a massive outlay on a new storage building. The protected boats could remain outside, providing the engine work had been done. This meant that our storage capacity was almost infinite as we had lots of land. We soon contracted to store about 70 boats, even with the price increase, so this was a good start to building up the business. It was now early May 1986, and the busy season was just round the corner. We had about a month to remove the boats from storage, clean them up, and after a test, run moor them at the docks ready for the owners. We worked hard to successfully achieve this. Our first customer was Marty Nicandro, a native of the Philippines, a nicer gentleman you could not wish to meet, but very matter-of-fact. He owned an island on the lake and needed some work done on his boat. He brought with him a VHF radio, CB, radio, fish finder, and depth sounder, and asked me how long it would take me to fit them. I suspected that he was expecting a glib response, outlining all kinds of problems, as he looked quite surprised when I replied, "If you are up next weekend, your boat will be ready then." He appeared satisfied and left. Rita was breathless. "You have no idea about these things, so how can you promise what you did?" "Don't worry, I'll figure it out," was my nervous reply. My electronic and mechanical background helped. I also contacted companies, read books, and instructions about Marty's equipment, and confidently completed the task as promised. As a goodwill gesture, I made a portable console to house all the equipment. This slid under the dashboard and could easily be removed and stored indoors for security purposes. I covered this bonus with the same material as his interior upholstery, which was luckily in stock. Marty arrived the following weekend and came to collect his expensive toy. It was about to appear even more expensive. His face dropped as I gave him my bill for the work, $128,000. I had charged for 3,000 mosquito bites at so much a bite, similar for the horseflies and black flies. You get the picture. But it took him a minute or two before he cottoned onto my sense of humor. He laughed till he ached and actually framed the invoice after he paid the actual price in cash. He was overjoyed with the removable console, as he was very security conscious. That was our first encounter with our potentially best customer and close friend to this day. I would ask you to remember his name, as he is mentioned several times throughout the book. In our continuing efforts to fit into the close-knit community and for our own personal pleasure, we joined the Canadian Legion. The activities were many and included weekly dart games, which we enjoyed immensely. These only took place in the winter, as most people were too busy during the tourist season. I also joined the Lions, but I'm sorry to say that I could not devote enough of my time to be of much service to that charitable organization. I'm sorry, too, that the local schoolmaster who sponsored me was later charged with child sex abuse going back for 20 or so years. Thank God I was now an adult. It was a bombshell. The alleged pedophile was a model citizen and a very likable chap. You never know, do you? Despite this, I enjoyed my time in the club and did what I could to help them raise money for the blind. They do a great job. Please support them if you can. Staying with the social life, we found that in a small community, everyone seems to be related in some way. Therefore, anybody that gives a party invites everyone and the whole village shows up. You need lots of stamina to keep up the pace. It really is extremely nice, but can be quite exhausting.